Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we help you cut through all the noise and get to what really matters.
Exactly. We go deep so you don't have to.
Yeah, and today we're going to take a look at the world of recovered carbon black, that's rCB, and tyre pyrolysis oil, or TPO.
Two sides of the same coin, you could say.
Right, and our primary source for this deep dive is going to be this really fantastic newsletter by Martin von Wolferstorff from February 2025.
Great overview of the industry.
Yeah, so this is going to be our snapshot in time as we look at this, really dynamic and changing field, and hopefully by the end you'll know everything you need to know about what's happening right now.
And why it matters.
Exactly. So, I guess one of the first things that stood out to me was this big announcement from Bridgestone and their Eco-Carbon Black initiative. So what struck you as interesting as you read about that?
Well, I think what's really key with Bridgestone is this focus on quality. They're really targeting those impurities that have always been a bit of a talent with rCB and really trying to boost that performance in the rubber compounds.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's all about making it actually usable.
Exactly. And I think the fact that they're establishing this 5,000-ton per year demonstration plant by 2032, really signals that they're serious about this.
Oh yeah, 2032 seems so far away, but it'll be here before we know it.
It will. And when you consider that, the Asia-Pacific region, excluding China, is expected to have an rCB production capacity of over 150,000 tons per year by 2032.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
It is. So even though 5,000 tons seems like a relatively small step, it's a significant indicator of where they're heading.
Definitely. And you know what else I thought was really fascinating is that they're also doing all this R&D into direct reuse of carbon black in polymer composites.
Yeah, potentially through devulcanization.
Right. So basically breaking down that rubber structure so it can be reused directly.
Exactly. It's kind of like skipping the pyrolysis step.
Which could be a game changer.
It could, from an energy consumption standpoint, resource efficiency, the whole bit.
I mean, if they could make that work on a large scale, that would be a whole different ball game.
Absolutely. And it also makes you wonder about how all of this fits in with their European collaborations. They've got those partnerships with Universalis and BB&G.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe there are two different tracks here for their research.
Could be. And I think, the fact that it's not entirely clear where they're getting their raw rCB from adds another layer of intrigue.
Yeah, those old rumors about Enrestec getting involved.
Makes you wonder if there's something more to that story.
Definitely. Lots of moving pieces there with Bridgestone. So moving on, the newsletter then talks about this sort of sponge-like nature of rCB, which I thought was a really interesting visual.
It is. And before milling, it really does kind of look like a sponge.
So why does it develop this structure during pyrolysis? I mean, what's going on there?
Well, essentially, as those end-of-life tires get heated up, the rubber polymers start to decompose, but it's not a clean break. You get this carbon-rich residue forming on the surface of the material.
Okay.
And that becomes the rCB, but at the same time, all these gases are being produced and they're escaping, leaving behind this network of pores.
Oh, so that's where the sponge analogy comes in.
Exactly. And it's interesting because, with furnace carbon black, most of the surface area is on the exterior.
Right.
But with rCB, you have all this internal surface area within those pores, almost like activated carbon.
So is that why milling is so important? Because it basically opens up all those pores?
Precisely, you're mechanically breaking down those big clumps or agglomerates and creating all these fresh reactive surfaces.
So the finer the milling, the better.
Generally speaking, yeah, you get better dispersion within the new material, and that translates to improved reinforcement.
Interesting. And there was this point in the newsletter about how a D97 top cut of around 10 micrometers is becoming kind of an industry standard.
Yeah, that seems to be emerging for most applications, but then you have companies like Black Bear Carbon who are finding benefits with a much finer D97 of just 3 micrometers for some specialty uses.
Like coloring plastics?
Exactly. So it just shows you that there's potential to really tailor those rCB properties through the milling process.
And what about that point about ash content being below 16% when you're using car tires as an indicator of excessive coking?
Right. So that basically tells you if the pyrolysis conditions are leading to too much of that carbonaceous residue.
Which you don't want?
Not ideally, no. It could mean you're sacrificing yield or quality.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot with the process parameters, right?
Exactly. Temperature, pressure, residence time, even the size of the tire pieces.
Wow, so many factors to consider.
It's a complex process for sure.
All right, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the specific companies that are making moves in this space. The newsletter highlighted ReOil in Poland as a company that's been quietly expanding.
Yeah, they've been kind of under the radar.
Yeah, so what's the story there?
Well, they're actually the largest and longest running rCB producer in Europe.
Wow, didn't realize that.
Yeah, so they've got a lot of experience under their belt, and they produce both rCB, which they call reblack, and TPO.
Okay, so they're covering both sides of the equation.
Exactly. And they've got some interesting partnerships going on with companies like Zeppelin Group, Messer, Sumitomo Tires, Hart Group.
Quite a range.
It is. And then they're actually starting construction on a second, even bigger production facility.
Oh, wow. Where is that?
It's going to be in Bocomo, right next to their existing plant.
Okay, so they must be pretty confident about their growth plans.
Oh, definitely. And I think the fact that they're hosting the Azer Netzwerk Chemical Recycling Workshop in the summer of 2025 really shows that they're becoming a key player in this industry.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they've been around for a while, so they've had time to build up that expertise.
Exactly. And I think, their under-the-radar approach has probably helped them build a really solid foundation.
Yeah, sometimes slow and steady wins the race.
Absolutely.
So staying in Poland for a moment, the newsletter also mentions Orion SA and their new tyre pyrolysis oil supply agreement with Contec.
Right. So Orion is a carbon black manufacturer.
Okay.
And they've been making moves to increase their circular carbon black production.
So using TPO as a feedstock.
Exactly. And they've actually installed these special tanks for TPO at their Jaslo facility in Poland.
Interesting. And Contec is also a Polish company, right?
Yeah, they produce both rCB and TPO, so this agreement with Orion is basically a way for them to secure a more diverse feedstock supply.
Ah, so they're not just relying on one source anymore.
Exactly. It gives them more flexibility and potentially opens up some opportunities to use Contec's rCB as well.
That makes sense. And, the newsletter actually did some calculations based on the estimated capacity of those TPO tanks at Jaslo.
Right. It looks like they could potentially store around 5,000 tons total.
Wow.
And if about 10% of that is allocated for TPO,
Then they'd be consuming around 3,200 tons of TPO per year.
which is a pretty significant amount. And, Contec is estimated to have a TPO delivery capacity of over 6,000 tons per year in 2025.
So they're definitely capable of meeting that demand.
It seems so. And don't forget, you've also got other potential TPO suppliers in Poland, like ReOil and those batch pyrolysis companies.
Right. So there's a whole ecosystem developing there.
It's all starting to come together.
Okay, well, let's zoom out a bit and look at some developments outside of Poland. Epsilon Carbon from India is making some interesting moves.
Yeah, they've just launched their TerraBlack line of sustainable carbon blacks.
Okay, and what's special about those?
Well, they've got two main products, TerraBlack 6615, which is a blend of rCB and conventional carbon black,
Okay.
and then TerraBlack 3310, which is what they call a circular prime carbon black.
And that one's designed to match the performance of a standard N300 tread grade.
Right, so they're really targeting the specific needs of the tire industry.
That's smart. And they're planning to build a whole new production line in India, right?
Yeah, an integrated rCB and TPO facility at their Vijayanagar site. They're aiming to process around 30,000 tons of end-of-life tires per year into 12,000 tons of TPO and 9,500 tons of rCB.
Wow, so they're doing all in on this.
They are, and they're clearly serious about expanding into Europe, too. They've just appointed Jakub Swachka as their head of marketing in Europe.
Interesting. And the newsletter made a good point about using the term prime carbon black instead of virgin carbon black.
Yeah, it's a more accurate way to describe those conventionally produced carbon blacks.
Right, because they are engineered materials with very specific properties.
Exactly, and that's different from rCB, which is inherently a more heterogeneous material.
Okay, so now we come to a new player, Tyros BV. They're setting up shop in the port of Ostende.
Yeah, not a lot of details out there yet, but there are some pretty strong hints that Pyrum Innovations AG is their technology provider.
What makes you say that?
Well, first of all, they mention using an electrically heated reactor, which is a key feature of Pyrum's technology.
Okay.
And then there's the reported oil yield of only 27%, which aligns with Pyrum's typical mass balance.
Ah, so they tend to produce a higher proportion of gas.
Yeah, because of those high reactor temperatures.
Interesting. So this is just another example of how this whole sector is expanding across Europe.
Absolutely.
Now, on a more fundamental level, the newsletter highlights the importance of ASTM establishing a clear classification system for rCB.
Yeah, that's crucial if we want to see wider adoption of rCB.
Right, because if it's going to become a reliable commodity,
You need those clear and consistent specifications.
and that's what ASTM is working on right now,
Exactly. They've got this ballot going on to try and establish a standard classification.
which is really important for building trust and stable supply chains.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's hard for companies to know what they're getting.
Right, quality control is key. And speaking of trust and stability, we also have some news about investments in existing players.
Right. Tiger Infrastructure Partners just completed an investment in Boulder Industries.
And you've got a bit of history with Boulder, don't you?
I do, yeah. I was actually involved in helping them identify Antwerp as a potential location and recruit Frank Creamer.
Oh, wow, small world.
It is, and I think this investment is really good news for Boulder. They were one of the early innovators in rCB, but they've had some financial struggles lately.
Yeah, that's what the newsletter said.
So this injection of capital will hopefully get them back on track, especially with that big EU grant they got for the Antwerp site.
That's great to hear. I mean, Boulder has always been a company that focuses on quality control,
Right from the start, yeah, they were really ahead of the curve on that.
so it's good to see them getting the support they need.
Definitely. And then we also have the big news about VTTI partnering with Pyrum for a huge facility in the port of Antwerp, Bruges.
Yeah, 90,000 tons of end-of-life tire processing capacity. That's massive.
It is. And VTTI is a major player in energy infrastructure, so they bring a lot of financial muscle and expertise to the table.
That's interesting that they're taking 100% ownership of this and future facilities with Pyrum acting as the development partner.
Yeah, it's a different model than Pyrum's usual joint ventures, and the newsletter suggests it's probably to avoid any conflicts with BASX TPO supply.
That makes sense.
And that 90,000 ton capacity is interesting too. It's not a direct multiple of Pyrum's standard system size.
So they must be doing some optimization there.
It seems so, and VTTI has also said they want to install Pyrum's technology at other locations.
Wow, so they're really committed to this.
Absolutely, it's a huge vote of confidence for the whole sector.
So, I mean, looking back at all of this from February 2025, what would you say are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a real acceleration in the rCB and tyre pyrolysis sector on multiple fronts. You've got Bridgestone focusing on quality and innovation, ReOil expanding their production capacity, Orion securing their feedstock supply, Epsilon Carbon coming in with these integrated models.
Yeah, and new ventures popping up like Tyros BV.
Exactly. And then you've got ASTM working on standardization and these big investments coming in from companies like Tiger Infrastructure Partners and VTTI.
It's like all the pieces are starting to fall into place.
It really is. It's a very dynamic and exciting time for this industry.
It makes you think about how this could change the way we approach manufacturing in general.
Absolutely. Moving away from a linear take-make-waste model towards a more circular economy.
Right, where waste streams become valuable resources.
Exactly. And I think that's the key takeaway here for listeners. Think about what these developments mean for your own industry or area of interest.
Yeah, how could this shift towards recovered materials impact your work or the products you use?
The momentum is building, and it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Well, that's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the world of recovered carbon black and tire pyrolysis oil.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope you found this informative and insightful. Until next time.
See you then.
Bye.